The phone rang with a shrill, piercing sound that cut through the silence of my apartment. I glanced at the screen. It was a number I hadn't saved but knew by heart. A ghost from a life I was trying to bury. I let it ring twice more before swiping to answer, placing it on speakerphone as I stared out the window at the city lights. "Ethan," a voice croaked, laced with a desperation I hadn't heard since we were children. "David." I didn't say anything. I just let the silence stretch, a form of punishment he was all too familiar with. "Ethan, please," he begged, his voice cracking. "You have to help me." "Dad," he cut me off. "Claire is demanding child support. I'm losing everything." A bitter, humorless laugh escaped my lips. It sounded foreign, even to me. "You're just realizing that now? This isn't fair. It wasn't just my fault," he whined. The old, familiar sound of a spoiled child who never had to face the consequences of his actions. I took a slow, deliberate breath. "You should have thought about that before you slept with my wife," I said, my voice as cold and sharp as a shard of glass. "You should have thought about it before you got her pregnant and let me raise your son." The line went quiet, filled only by his ragged breathing. I could almost picture him, stunned and cornered, the golden boy finally tarnished beyond repair. "Now you want my help?" I continued, the words dripping with years of suppressed rage. "After our parents disowned you and left me their $2 million inheritance? You have some nerve." "David." I hung up before he could respond. The silence that followed was a relief, a deep, satisfying calm. To understand the ice in my voice, to understand why I felt nothing but a distant, cold vindication as my own brother's world crumbled. "You have to go back, all the way back to a quiet, tree-lined street in suburban Ohio, where the roots of this betrayal were planted and watered for years. My younger brother, David, has always harbored a deep-seated resentment towards me. If you think it stemmed from jealousy, you'd be wrong. He was the favored child, not me. There was no reason for him to be envious. He was the sun our family orbited around, and I was just a forgotten moon, catching his reflected light. To give you some context, our mother always indulged David. He was the golden child of our family, the living embodiment of all her hopes. She cooked his meals, special orders if he didn't like what the rest of us were having. She did his laundry, folding his clothes with a reverence she never showed my own. She even asked me, her older son, to help him with his schoolwork. "Ethan, honey, you're so smart," she'd say, her voice sweet and persuasive. "Just help your brother with his history paper. He's struggling." I was expected to assist him simply because we were family, but I never received the same consideration. I accepted this as I was quite independent, a quiet kid who found more comfort in books than in people. Perhaps it was partly my fault for always meeting his needs without expecting anything in return. He never helped me when I needed it and only approached me when he wanted something. His world was transactional, and I was just a resource to be used. While I was a quiet, introverted kid who enjoyed studying and keeping to myself, he was loud and rough, just like our dad. I also tend to be straightforward and honest, never sugarcoating things. I believe my mother may have developed a negative perception of me because of my straightforwardness. My honesty was seen as bluntness, my introversion as aloofness. David's boisterous nature, however, was seen as confidence. This favoritism made David the family's darling, and I didn't mind it while we were growing up. I found my own space, my own world within the pages of books. However, problems began when he started bullying and mocking me for being different from him. He would tease me about my height. I was tall and lanky for my age. He'd mock the fact that I wore glasses. "Hey, 4 eyes," he'd yell across the schoolyard, his friends laughing along with him. He would sneak into my room, a sanctuary I tried so hard to protect, and read my diary. He'd then run to my mom, twisting my private thoughts into complaints about him. When I yelled at him, my voice shaking with rage at the invasion of my privacy, and complained to our parents, they would laugh it off. "Oh, Ethan, it's not a big deal," my mother would say. ruffling David's hair. He's just curious. He did more awful things, escalating his torment slowly, methodically. He once accidentally knocked my glasses off my face, nearly shattering them on the pavement. He would put nasty things in my food, a clump of dirt in my sandwich, an excessive amount of salt in my soup. He even once put little stones in my cereal, a cruel trap meant to break my teeth. Luckily, I was a slow eater and found them before I could bite down. When I told my mom, showing her the small, gray pebbles in my palm, she dismissed it. "Oh, stop being so dramatic," she sighed. "This is how brothers bond." Whenever we fought, David would zero in on my insecurities to insult me. We went to the same school, so he knew I was being bullied by a few kids. Instead of supporting me, his own brother, he sided with the bullies. He saw my vulnerability as an opportunity. He'd join in, calling me names like ugly loser or hairy monkey, his voice ringing with malice. He even encouraged them to physically harm me, telling them I was weak, a big failure who wouldn't fight back. Another time, during a fight over something trivial that I can't even remember, he looked me dead in the eye and said, "Why don't you just kill yourself?" While I could easily brush off most insults, that one really hurt. It was a direct hit to a wound I kept hidden from everyone. I was struggling with my mental health at the time, battling feelings of loneliness and depression that felt like a heavy cloak I couldn't shrug off. I'm doing better now. But back then, it was devastating to hear that my own brother, the one who was supposed to be my family, wanted me dead. Since Dad was often at work, a distant figure absorbed in his job, Mom was the primary authority at home, but she didn't seem to care much. She even scolded me once after that incident, claiming it was my fault for irritating him into saying it. "You know how he gets, Ethan," she said, her tone accusatory. "You need to learn not to provoke him." Things progressively worsened during high school. There was a shocking incident when I was 15. We were in the backyard, and David was messing around with a lighter and a can of hairspray, trying to create a makeshift flamethrower. I told him to stop, that it was dangerous. He just laughed, that arrogant smirk plastered on his face. Then, he turned and aimed it at me. He attempted to set my hair on fire. A jet of flame shot out, missing my head by inches. The heat was intense, and I could smell the acrid scent of burnt hair where the very tips had been singed. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest. A primal fear shot through me. Unbelievably, our mother, who saw the whole thing from the kitchen window, rushed out and defended him. "David, stop that," she said, but there was no real anger in her voice. She turned to me, her face a mask of annoyance. "He was merely playing, Ethan. It was a joke. Playing. Seriously. Who behaves like that? Who thinks aiming a column of fire at their brother's head is a form of play?" Thankfully, my dad pulled into the driveway right at that moment. He saw the lighter in David's hand, the look of terror on my face, and the faint wisp of smoke in the air. For the first time, something in him snapped. He wasn't the distant, work-obsessed father anymore. He strode over, his face a storm cloud, and snatched the lighter from David's hand. "What in God's name do you think you're doing?" he boomed, his voice a low growl that I had never heard before. "I was just kidding, Dad," David stammered, his bravado instantly evaporating. My dad wasn't having it. He pointed a stern finger at David. "That's not a joke. That is assault. Do you understand me? I could call the police on you right now." This moment was a real eye-opener for my brother. He had never faced any real consequences for his actions before. He was genuinely stunned, his mouth hanging open. My dad made it clear that enough was enough, and that David needed to start respecting his older brother. It was a turning point, a crack in the foundation of David's untouchable world. Later that night, Dad came into my room to talk. I never expected his support because he always told David how similar they were, which was true in many ways. They shared the same rough and tumble energy. But that night, my dad sat on the edge of my bed, his face etched with a weary disappointment. He admitted that he had waited for years, hoping David would mature, that he would grow out of his cruel streak. But he was slowly realizing that David wasn't just immature. He was becoming a big bully. Hearing this from my dad was incredibly validating. A lump formed in my throat, and I almost broke down in tears. It felt like for the first time, someone in my own family actually saw me, saw what I had been going through. I confessed everything David had done to me over the years. The constant mocking, the stolen diary, the stones in my cereal. I even mentioned the bullying at school and how David not only stood by but actively participated. My dad was shocked at how much I had endured in silence. The next day, he kept his word. He went to my school and spoke to the principal to ensure the bullies were warned about severe consequences if they continued. Later that evening, Dad enrolled me in MMA classes at our local gym. He looked me in the eye and told me, "You need to man up, Ethan. You need to learn to stand up to the bullies in your life, whether they're at school or right here in this house." I admit that a nerdy kid like me trying to learn to fight might have seemed laughable, but I was very focused. I was tired of being a victim. I managed my time well to balance my studies and daily workouts. Those MMA classes completely changed my life. They chiseled away at my lanky frame, building muscle and discipline. More importantly, they forged a core of confidence inside me that I never knew I had. I learned how to take a punch, but more importantly, I learned that I was strong enough to throw one back. The timid boy who hid in books was slowly being replaced by a young man who could stand his ground. And soon, David would discover that change firsthand. One sweltering summer afternoon, David was up to his usual antics. He stole my pocket money, which we received for helping with chores around the house. It wasn't much, but I had been saving it for a while, carefully stashing the bills in an old book on my shelf. I was saving up for a new telescope, something I dreamed of for months. David sneaked into my room and took it all. I caught him just as he was about to cycle off with his friends, a smug look on his face. The stolen cash was clearly visible, sticking out of his back pocket. "Give it back, David," I said, my voice low and steady. I stood in his path, blocking his escape. He laughed, a condescending sound that used to make me flinch. "What are you gonna do about it, Ethan?" he sneered. "Run to Daddy for help." His friends snickered behind him. In that moment, something inside me broke. It wasn't a loud, dramatic shatter, but a quiet, decisive snap. All the years of humiliation, of being the butt of his jokes, of swallowing my anger, it all coalesced into a single, focused point of energy. I don't know what came over me, but I didn't hesitate. I punched him in the face. The crack of my knuckles against his jaw was surprisingly loud. He was so stunned that he didn't even try to block it. He stumbled backward, his eyes wide with disbelief, and fell off his bike. I calmly reached into his pocket, retrieved my money, and then, for good measure, I shoved him back down onto the grass when he tried to get up. David, the tough guy, the bully, started crying, not just quiet sniffles, but loud, comical sobs, like a toddler who dropped his ice cream. His friends just stared, their mouths agape, unsure how to react to this sudden shift in the world order. Of course, my mother rushed out of the house to see what all the commotion was about. Her eyes immediately went to David, her precious boy, wailing on the lawn. When she learned that I had fought him, she was surprised and immediately reprimanded me. "Ethan, what is wrong with you?" she scolded, her hands on her hips. "You're the older brother. You should be a better role model for David." David, through his crocodile tears, seemed to enjoy seeing me scolded. It was his ultimate trump card. My mother also complained to my dad about my behavior later that evening, saying I needed to be controlled, that my MMA classes were turning me into a thug. My dad grimly asked both of us to explain ourselves. We stood in the living room, a makeshift courtroom. I told him how David had stolen the money I had worked hard for and saved. David, trying to play the victim, tried to justify it by saying he needed the money for a date and that as his brother, I should help him. He expected our usual family script to play out. David makes an excuse. Mom defends him. Dad stays out of it. And I'm told to be more understanding. But Dad didn't follow the script. He looked at David. His expression grim. You're lucky he only punched you for stealing, he said. His voice flat. Anyone else would have called the police. He continued. His gaze unwavering. You have no right to take other people's things without their consent. That's called theft. David. Not borrowing and not needing help. David didn't like that one bit. He threw a tantrum, screaming and crying, likely hoping our mother would swoop in and side with him as she always did. But Dad remained firm. When David realized he wasn't going to be punished for being hit, that I was the one being defended, he screamed, I hate you. I hate you both, and ran back to his room, slamming the door behind him. Following that incident, David began to distance himself from me. He had finally understood that he couldn't bully me anymore. Not physically. He knew that if he tried, I would fight back, and that even Dad had stopped supporting his antics. For the first time in a long while, I felt like we were equals. Though he could no longer physically harm me, he resorted to verbal insults when our parents weren't around. His behavior worsened with age, becoming angrier and more short-tempered each year. When I approached him with a simple question, he would ignore me and walk away, muttering insults like nerd or loser under his breath. If he needed to communicate something to me, he would relay it through our mother instead of speaking to me directly. It was a pathetic, childish power play. When I questioned her about why David couldn't just talk to me, she would urge me to be more understanding. He's just going through a phase. Ethan, she'd say with a sigh, you're the mature one. Just let it go. I couldn't tell if it was just puberty or genuine hatred. Over time, dealing with his constant passive aggression became unbearable, and I longed to move out and get away from him for good. I repeatedly asked my mother to mediate a sit-down conversation for us to resolve our issues, but she always refused, saying she didn't want to get involved. When I asked her opinion on why David treated me this way, she would just brush off the question. She chose willful blindness over parenting. Eventually, I left for my dream university, having earned a full scholarship as a top student. It was my ticket out. My dad threw a party for me, his pride evident in the way he clapped me on the back and introduced me to his friends. Even my mom seemed genuinely proud, a rare and fleeting moment of warmth. However, David remained aloof and distant, barely acknowledging my achievements. He stood in the corner of the room, scrolling on his phone, a dark cloud in an otherwise sunny day. The day I left for university was a mix of excitement for the future and profound relief to escape the toxic home environment. The first few months at the University of Michigan were liberating. I made new friends, people who valued me for who I was. I enjoyed my classes, diving deep into computer science, a subject that fascinated me. I started to build a life separate from the oppressive atmosphere of my childhood. The constant fear of David's verbal attacks lifted, giving me a newfound sense of peace. During my second year, I met my wife, Claire. It was at a frat party, a place I normally would have avoided, but a friend dragged me along. She was standing by the makeshift bar, laughing with her friends, and her smile lit up the entire room. We started talking, and we immediately clicked. She was studying nursing, and she had a warmth and kindness about her that I found incredibly magnetic. Coming from a religious background, having kids outside of marriage was frowned upon in her family. So, when we discovered she was pregnant in our final year, we decided to marry right after graduation. Our wedding was a small but joyful ceremony at a local courthouse, with just our parents and a few close friends. Our parents were happy for us, and we enjoyed the celebration at a nearby restaurant. At that moment, holding her hand, I believed Claire was the love of my life. I had always envisioned a monogamous relationship, one woman to come home to and share my life with. Despite other women showing interest over the years, I never pursued anything because I was genuinely content in my marriage. Claire was my dream girl, and I never wanted to hurt her. She was the anchor I needed, the foundation for the stable, loving family I never had. However, I later uncovered two incidents of infidelity in our marriage. It turned out the idyllic life I thought I was building was a house of cards. The first was an intermittent affair with her married co-worker that spanned several years, something she confessed to tearfully after I found suspicious messages on her phone. The other was a brief fling with an ex-boyfriend during a visit to her family back home. Some might think I was naive for staying, and looking back, I can't completely disagree. Each time, we separated for a while, and each time, I chose to forgive my wife. I didn't want to raise our child, our son Henry, in a broken home. I believed we could overcome these obstacles. The affair with her co-worker happened when we were young, and I attributed it to youthful mistakes and poor judgment. For a period, things seemed to get better, although I could never fully trust her again. I did my best to set aside my doubts. I knew that if I chose to forgive, I had to genuinely work toward a fresh start. It's been 4 years since her second betrayal, and I felt confident in my decision to give her another chance. Claire seemed to have changed. We were genuinely happy, planning our family's future, looking at bigger houses, talking about a second child. The past felt like a scar that had healed over, a reminder of a pain that was no longer fresh. However, 3 months ago, my world was shattered once more, this time so completely that there would be no rebuilding. She revealed that she had been having another long-term affair, and then she dropped the bomb that destroyed everything. She looked at me, her expression unreadable, and suggested that our son, my Henry, might not be mine. Her words struck me like a ton of bricks. A mix of shock, betrayal, and disbelief overwhelmed me. I struggled to comprehend the enormity of her confession. In 8 days, I managed to ask why she had kept such a significant secret, and how she could have done something so devastating. Her reaction was cold and indifferent, as if she were detached from the pain she was causing. Her vague responses left me with more questions than answers. It was a surreal and painful moment, confronting the shattered trust and the terrifying uncertainty about my own family. I continued to press Claire for the truth because I felt I deserved to know the father of the child I had been raising since birth. Ultimately, after hours of painful, circular arguments, she admitted it. The man she had been sleeping with, the man who might be my son's biological father, was David, my brother. My eyes widened in shock. The name hung in the air between us, thick and poisonous. David, I repeated, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. What do you mean? David. Claire wouldn't look at me. She stared at a spot on the wall, her hands twisting in her lap. She explained that she and David had become friends when I first introduced her to my family. It was during that first long holiday break, from Thanksgiving until New Year's, when she stayed with us. I remembered that time well. David, who was usually so cold and dismissive towards me, was warm and polite towards her. He'd laugh at her jokes, ask her questions about her studies, and even offer to help her with her bags. I was glad, genuinely glad, because I didn't want Claire to feel unwelcome in my chaotic family. I thought maybe, just maybe, her presence could bridge the chasm between my brother and me. Claire wanted to be accepted into my family, so she spent significant time with my mom whenever possible. They would cook together, and my mom, for the first time, seemed to approve of a choice I'd made. Claire noticed the rift between David and me and questioned me about it one evening. While we were alone, I opened up to her, telling her about our strained relationship, explaining that we might never repair it due to his unresolved feelings and years of resentment. Claire understood, or at least she seemed to, but she started including David in our outings, hoping it would help us bond. Whenever we planned to watch a movie, she'd insist on inviting David. "It'll be fun, Ethan, the 3 of us," she'd say, and I'd reluctantly agree. We always ended up watching whatever action movie he chose. During this time, David and I exchanged a few words, which was an improvement compared to his usual silent treatment. I saw it as progress, a small victory orchestrated by the woman I loved. I was a fool, I remember Claire and David hanging out and playing video games together in the basement. I'd hear their laughter echoing up the stairs and feel a sense of contentment. I never thought much of it. I trusted her. I trusted that even my broken brother wouldn't cross such a fundamental line. Claire told me that one day, while I was out running errands, David opened up to her about his struggles. He was going through a recent breakup and was feeling vulnerable. He spun a tale of loneliness and misunderstanding, painting himself as the tragic hero of his own story. He struck up a friendship with her, a secret alliance forged in my own home. She mentioned that he would harmlessly flirt with her when I wasn't around. Little compliments, a lingering touch on her arm. She said she brushed it off at first, but eventually, things escalated beyond her control. The vision of my wife and my brother sleeping together, likely in my childhood home, maybe even in my own bed, made me feel physically sick. I had to brace myself against the kitchen counter, a wave of nausea washing over me. Claire confessed that she felt guilty afterward and left him. Her story matched her abrupt decision to go home right after Christmas, instead of spending New Year's with me as we had planned. I remember trying to convince her to stay, confused by her sudden change of heart, but she was adamant about leaving. When we met back at college after the holidays, she was her usual cheerful self, so I didn't question anything. I just assumed she'd been homesick. 2 weeks later, we found out she was pregnant. Claire admitted she didn't know if the child was mine or David's. There was no way to prove it at the time without raising impossible questions, so she chose to stay with me, knowing I was the more dependable brother, the responsible one, the one who would provide a stable life. I knew you would be a good father, Ethan, she said, as if that was supposed to be a compliment. This was why we got married, not out of pure love, not because we were starting a family together, but because she was hedging her bets, and I was the safe one. My world felt like it was crashing down. The son I loved, the little boy whose scraped knees I'd bandaged, whose bedtime stories I'd read every single night, Henry might not even be mine. His laugh, his smile, the way his hair curled at the nape of his necky had always seen pieces of myself in him. Now, I wondered if I had just been projecting, seeing what I wanted to see. My voice was barely a whisper. Have you been sleeping with David recently? She slowly nodded, the movement so small I almost missed it. The final nail in the coffin of our marriage. She revealed that they had always stayed in touch. Their chemistry, she said, was undeniable. They would sneak off to hotels, lying to me about working overtime or meeting up with friends. She admitted that half of her business trips, the ones I supported and encouraged, were actually romantic getaways with him. For years, my life had been an elaborate stage play, and I was the only one who didn't know his lines. Why? I asked, the only word I could manage. Why did you marry me if you wanted my brother? Claire finally looked at me, and there were tears in her eyes, but they felt hollow, performative. I didn't want to be the one to break off the marriage. She said softly, I saw you as a wonderful father to Henry. You were so good to him, to us. I made a mistake, and I didn't know when to stop. A mistake. She called years of calculated deceit a mistake. I'm glad you told me the truth, I said, my voice eerily calm. The storm of emotion inside me was so immense that it had become a strange, unsettling stillness. But I'm going to pack up and leave now. She started crying for real then, her shoulders shaking. She asked for forgiveness and seemed to expect me to yell at her, to scream and throw things. She was prepared for a fight. Instead, I calmly walked to our bedroom and pulled a suitcase from the top of the closet. Claire followed me, her pleas becoming more frantic. If you loved me, you would fight for me, she cried. Mistakes happen in every marriage. Ethan, we can work through this. When she realized I wasn't going to do anything, that her tears had no effect, she changed tactics. What about Henry? She said, her voice rising. Our son is going to be affected by a divorce. Children shouldn't be raised in broken homes. I stopped packing and turned to face her. I reminded her that I might not even be the father. I said, My words cold and precise. That made her cry more, and she accused me of being cruel. It seemed like she genuinely believed nothing could make me want to leave the marriage. Perhaps it was partly my fault for letting things slide in the past, for forgiving her previous betrayals. My capacity for forgiveness had become a weakness she could exploit. While I did love her, or at least the idea of her, I realized in that moment that my love was deeply entangled with the belief that we had a son together, that we had built a family from our shared college memories. Claire kept insisting it wasn't too late to fix things, but I struggled to believe her. I had no patience left. Trust was the foundation of our relationship, and she had taken a sledgehammer to it. Her words felt hollow and manipulative. Even if I forgave her, I could never forget. I could never unsee the image of her with my brother. I've always believed in forgiving mistakes because we're all flawed human beings. But this was beyond a mistake. This was a betrayal of the highest order, a conscious, long-term decision to deceive and disrespect me in the most painful way imaginable. I zipped up my suitcase and walked towards the front door. She stood in my way, still crying, still begging. I stepped around her. I left her crying on the doorstep and checked into a hotel. The anonymous, sterile room felt more like a home than the house I had just left. The next morning, fueled by a sleepless night of rage and grief, I drove straight to my parents' house. I was going to burn it all down. I found them in the kitchen, enjoying a quiet Sunday morning. My dad was reading the newspaper, and my mom was humming as she made coffee. The peaceful domesticity of the scene felt like a cruel joke. I didn't waste any time with pleasantries. I revealed everything about my wife's affair with David, explaining how they had been secretly sleeping together for years. Starting from that very first holiday visit, the shock on their faces was undeniable. My father's newspaper slipped from his hands, and my mother dropped a spoon with a clatter. True to her nature, my mother was the first to speak, and her first instinct was to defend her golden child. That's not possible, she insisted, shaking her head. My boy could never do such a thing to his own brother. Claire must be lying. I had expected this. I was prepared. Fine, I said, pulling out my phone. You don't have to believe me. Let's hear it from him. Determined to expose the truth, I asked my parents to remain silent and let me call David in front of them. Just stay quiet, I instructed them, my voice hard. I'm going to catch him off guard. He needs to believe it's a private conversation. My mother looked hesitant, but my father nodded grimly, his face a mask of stone. I dialed David's number and put the phone on speaker. He answered on the third ring, his voice lazy and confident. Hey, what's up? I know, I said, cutting straight to the point. I know about you and Claire. There was a pause. What are you talking about? He said, trying to sound confused, but I could hear the edge of panic in his voice. At first, he vehemently denied it, refusing to accept any responsibility. He tried to laugh it off, calling me paranoid. However, when I told him that Claire had admitted to everything, his tone shifted. He started blaming her, his voice turning vicious. That girl has no character. He spat. It's not my fault if women are attracted to me. You know I've always been the better-looking brother. I almost laughed at his pathetic arrogance. So you're admitting it? I pressed. No one will believe you anyway. David mocked, his confidence returning. Everyone knows I'm the golden child. They'll think you're just making it up because you're jealous. I scoffed. A dry, harsh sound. Thank you, David, I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Thanks for confirming the truth. I glanced at my parents. My father's face was white with rage. My mother looked like she was about to be sick. David went quiet on the other end of the line. The realization of what he had just done, who might be listening, finally dawned on him. Wait, who's there? He spluttered, trying to explain himself and salvage his image. Ethan, what did you do? But it was too late. The truth was out, and it was uglier than any of them could have imagined. My mother, still in shock, finally found her voice. It was a trembling, broken sound. David, Is that true? She asked, her eyes wide with a horrified disbelief that was slowly curdling into anger. Answer me. Did you do this? David stuttered through a feeble attempt to justify his actions. He blamed everyone else but himself, desperately trying to shift the blame onto Claire. She came onto me. Mom, I swear. She was unhappy with Ethan, always complaining. I was just trying to be a friend, and she took advantage of me. His voice was a pathetic whine, the excuses of a man-child who had never been held accountable for anything in his life. He was throwing Claire under the bus without a second thought, painting her as a predator and himself as the innocent victim. I could see the conflict warring on my mother's face. The maternal instinct to protect her favored son was clashing with the undeniable, ugly truth she had just heard from his own lips. The boy she had coddled and defended, the one she believed could do no wrong, was now exposed as a liar, a cheat, and a betrayer of the worst kind. For the first time, I saw a flicker of something other than blind adoration in her eyes when she thought of David. It was a mix of disappointment and a dawning, terrible anger. In that charged moment, I felt a strange sense of vindication. It wasn't triumph. Not exactly. It was a hollow, quiet affirmation. For years, I had endured David's torment in silence, my pain dismissed and invalidated by the very people who were supposed to protect me. Now, the truth was out, raw and undeniable, and the roles were reversed. It was David who stood exposed, his carefully constructed image of the charming golden boy shattered, his actions laid bare for everyone to see. As David's words faltered, his lies becoming more and more tangled, my father, usually so reserved in his expressions, couldn't contain his disappointment. His face was a thunderous mask of fury. He held out his hand, his eyes locked on my phone. "Give it to me," he said, his voice a low command. I passed him the phone. He held it up to his mouth, his knuckles white. "David," my father began, his voice laden with a weight of disappointment that was more crushing than any shout could ever be. David went silent on the other end. "What you've done isn't just a betrayal of your brother," my dad continued, his words slow and measured, each one a hammer blow. "It's a betrayal of this entire family. You slept with your brother's wife. You continued the affair even after they were married, after they had a child. Your actions have severe consequences, David, and they have irreversibly shattered the trust we had in you." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink into the suffocating silence. I could hear David's faint, panic breathing through the speaker. "I raised both of you to value family, loyalty, and basic human decency. What you've shown today defies everything I've ever tried to teach you." My dad's voice cracked with emotion, a rare display of vulnerability. "Your complete disregard for your brother's feelings and the lack of respect for his marriage are unacceptable. You've not only hurt him, but you've also torn apart the bonds that hold our family together. Your mother and we are partly to blame for what you've become. We let you get away with too much, but we will no longer tolerate this behavior." The finality in his tone was absolute. This was not a lecture. It was a verdict. "From today," my father declared, his voice turning to steel, "you are cut off. The college funds I set up for you are frozen. You'll have to figure out how to pay your university fees on your own. I will also stop funding your lifestyle. The car, the apartment, the credit card, it's all gone. You think it makes you more of a man to sleep with married women? Let's see how you manage as a man without my money." Throughout this, I maintained a composed demeanor, an external calm that belied the chaotic storm of emotions inside me. I initially wanted to scream at David, to unleash decades of pent-up rage, but watching my dad methodically dismantle his world, piece by piece, was the ultimate vindication. It was better than any revenge I could have enacted myself. I had exposed his true nature, and it was clear he had completely underestimated the consequences. My mother, despite David's persistent protests still faintly audible through the phone, started to make excuses for him again. A pathetic, reflexive defense. "Bill, maybe we should hear him out," she began, her voice weak. But my father swiftly ended the call, shutting down David's desperate attempts to explain away his actions. He turned to my mother, his eyes flashing with a cold fire she wasn't used to seeing. "Don't," he warned. "Don't you dare defend him. Not this time." Afterward, my mom approached me. Her face was pale, and her eyes were filled with tears. She hugged me. It had been a long time since we shared such a moment, years since she had offered me any genuine physical comfort. But in that embrace, there was an unspoken understanding, a fragile, newfound support amid the family turmoil. She looked at me, really looked at me, and whispered, "I'm so sorry, Ethan. I'm so sorry for not believing you all this time." My 14-year-old self, the boy who cried himself to sleep after being told to kill himself, could never have imagined this moment. Being vindicated, being seen, and being embraced by my mother. It was a bittersweet victory, born from the ashes of our family. Following this, my dad became my staunchest ally. He helped me find a good lawyer to handle the divorce from Claire. She and her lawyer tried to fight dirty, asking for significant alimony since I earned more than her. But her documented affair played heavily in my favor. The law in Ohio is clear about marital misconduct affecting spousal support. Her infidelity became the cornerstone of my case. We also conducted a paternity test. It was just a formality at that point, but we needed the legal confirmation. The results came back a week later. It was confirmed that David was indeed the biological father of the child I had called son for 5 years. The news was incredibly painful, even worse than discovering Claire's infidelity. This was a concrete, scientific fact that I couldn't ignore or explain away. I was furious. The son I had loved and raised, the center of my universe, wasn't mine. He was a living symbol of my brother's ultimate betrayal and my wife's deceit. For a few days, I let the grief consume me. I didn't go to work. I didn't answer my phone. I just sat in my sterile hotel room, staring at the walls, letting the waves of pain wash over me. However, I decided to stay strong. I wouldn't let them break me. I had survived David's bullying and my mother's neglect. I would survive this too. Claire begged me to continue visiting Henry. She argued he shouldn't be punished for the situation, that he still saw me as his father. But I couldn't. I couldn't bear to see him. Every time I looked at his face, I would be reminded of David. I saw my brother's eyes, his smile, his mannerisms. It was a constant, agonizing reminder of the betrayal. I hated it. I knew it wasn't the boy's fault, but the pain was too raw. Seeing him would be like picking at a wound that would never heal. I told her I needed space, maybe forever. After my divorce was finalized, I felt a sense of freedom wash over me. I moved into my own bachelor pad in downtown Columbus, a modern apartment with a view of the city skyline. It felt surreal to live alone. I had married so young and never really had the chance to experience true independence. But my naturally independent nature allowed me to quickly adapt to my new lifestyle, and I found that I thoroughly enjoyed it. I rediscovered old hobbies, spent weekends hiking, and reconnected with college friends. I was slowly, painstakingly, rebuilding my life from the ground up. 2 weeks ago, my dad called to tell me he was officially changing his will. He was a man of his word. He didn't want to leave anything to David. My dad is incredibly stubborn, and once he decided to cut David out of his life, he stuck to it. David had tried reaching out to our parents, sending pleading texts and leaving desperate voicemails. He even showed up at their doorstep, begging for forgiveness, but they refused to let him in. Even my mother, who usually gave in to David's tantrums, seemed done with him. Though it must have been the hardest thing she'd ever had to do, she stood by my father's decision. David never once texted me to apologize for what he had done. Not a single word of remorse. It showed he didn't regret his actions. He only regretted the consequences. He was just upset about being cut off from our parents' money. Dad told me he planned to leave everything to me, ensuring David wouldn't be able to contest it later. He had hired a lawyer to make the will ironclad. He would leave David only $1, a final, symbolic gesture of his disownment. My eyes widened in shock as my dad listed his assets. He had worked hard his entire life, investing wisely, including his assets, retirement fund, and life insurance. The total came to nearly $2 million. The only condition in his will was that if my dad passed away before my mom, she would continue living in their house, even though ownership would transfer to me. I didn't mind this at all. In fact, I wanted to care for my mom in her final days. Despite everything, she was still my mother. Somehow, David found out about this. He was unable to reach our parents, who were now blocking his calls. So yesterday, he called me. It was the call that started this story. His last, desperate attempt to make amends. Not because he was sorry, but because he was broke. He explained how he was struggling with college, how the bills were piling up now that Dad's support had vanished. He told me that after Claire discovered the paternity of the child, she had been pestering him for child support, sending him letters from her lawyer. He was legally obligated to provide for the son he never wanted. The irony was thick enough to choke on. He said he had no money and was looking for part-time jobs but couldn't find anything that paid enough to cover his tuition and his new, unwelcome responsibilities. He begged me to talk to our family, to convince them to give him a second chance. We can start fresh, Ethan, he pleaded, his voice thin and reedy. We're brothers. You're the only one who can fix this. I really need your help. I laughed in his face. It was the call I described at the beginning, the one where I told him he should have thought about the consequences before he wrecked my life. I reminded him that he was the one who chose this path. He had made his bed with my wife, and now he had to lie in it. David argued that I was being unfair, that Claire was also to blame. I agree. I told him, my voice devoid of emotion. She is, and I divorced her. I cut her out of my life, just like I'm cutting you out of mine. I made her your responsibility, so don't you dare call me to complain about her or the child. These are the consequences of your own actions. David, yours and hers, not mine. David started to raise his voice, the old, entitled anger flaring up. You've always been like this, so self-righteous. But I interrupted him, cutting him off mid-sentence. Listen to me, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous low. You need to understand something. The rules have changed. You are no longer the favored child in this family. You're the black sheep. You're the man who slept with his own brother's wife and destroyed our family. That is who you are now. At that moment, David began to cry. The sound was jarring, a full-throated, gut-wrenching sob that echoed through the phone. He told me how everyone, including our grandparents, aunts, and uncles, had turned against him. The family grapevine had been working overtime, and his betrayal was common knowledge. While this was true, it was no longer my concern. His social exile was a problem of his own making. We're done, I told him, the words tasting like freedom. Never call me again. I no longer consider you my brother. I hung up. Since then, I've replayed that conversation in my mind. Despite my hatred for my brother, I had never heard him cry like that. At least not with genuine despair. Not since we were little kids. I won't lie. It did hurt me a bit to hear him so helpless. A small, foolish part of me, the part that still remembered building forts in the living room and catching fireflies in the backyard, felt a pang of something that might have been pity. So, I guess I'm here, telling this story to strangers on the internet, to ask if I should talk to our parents about him, or if I would be a fool if I did. I needed to know if my coldness was justified, or if it was just another form of cruelty. A cycle I was perpetuating. The comments poured in, a deluge of opinions and advice. An overwhelming majority told me to stand my ground, that David was only sorry he got caught. A few called me cruel for cutting off contact with Henry, but I had to explain my reasoning. I posted an update. Update 1. Hi everyone. Many of you have been asking why I am no longer in contact with my son, Henry, and some have even called me cruel. I need to explain that I am not comfortable raising another man's child. This isn't a stepson situation. I was led to believe Henry was my son, my own flesh and blood, only to later discover he is actually my brother David's son. Naturally, this revelation hurt deeply, and I cried over it for days. The main reason I don't want any contact with Henry is that I no longer want Claire in my life. If I remain connected to her child, she will find a way to re-enter my life, and I need my space to heal. You may think I'm cruel or selfish, but I can't see him ever again, at least not for a very long time. Seeing his face is a reminder of the worst betrayal a person can endure. The second update came a few days later, after a tense conversation with my parents. Most of the online commenters correctly guessed how David had found out about the will so quickly. Update 2. Most of you correctly guessed that it was my mother who informed David about my dad changing his will. Her loyalty, even after everything, was still fractured. This knowledge led David to call me as a last resort to fix things. I confronted her in front of my dad. I didn't yell. I just asked her, "Why? Mom, why are you still protecting him?" She broke down, sobbing, saying I had punished David enough and that he had learned his lesson. My dad, who had been silent up to that point, stood up. He firmly told my mother that if she believed what David did was forgivable, then he could no longer stay married to her. He said he could never forgive such a betrayal of family trust. This threat, the first real ultimatum he had ever given her in their 40 years of marriage, silenced my mother. My dad made it clear that if she ever talked with David again and we found out, she could pack her bags and leave. As I mentioned, my dad is a very stubborn man. Hopefully, my mother will learn from her mistakes this time. The threat worked. My mother, faced with the choice between her enabling love for one son and her entire life with her husband, finally chose my father. She chose the remnants of our broken family. The months that followed were a period of quiet rebuilding. I focused on my work, earning a promotion and a significant raise. The extra income was nice, but it was the distraction that I really needed. I threw myself into complex coding problems, finding a strange comfort in the logic and order of the digital world. A stark contrast to the chaos of my personal life. My relationship with my parents entered a new phase. My dad and I started going golfing every weekend. On the green, amidst the quiet focus of the game, we talked more than we ever had in my entire life. He treated me more like a buddy than a son, sharing stories from his youth, asking for my opinion on investments, and listening to my own struggles with a newfound empathy. It felt like we were making up for lost time. My mother was more complicated. She was quiet, almost withdrawn, navigating her own grief and guilt. She clearly missed David, her golden child, but she honored my father's wishes and stayed away from him. The house felt calmer without the constant tension of her divided loyalties. She started focusing more on me, asking about my day, cooking my favorite meals when I came over for dinner. It was a strained, awkward attempt to mend a lifetime of neglect, but it was an attempt nonetheless. I accepted it cautiously, keeping my heart guarded. The last I heard about David was from my cousin, who had run into him at a gas station. My cousin said David looked rough. He had been asking everyone in the extended family for money, but the well had run dry. No one wanted to be associated with him. Eventually, he had to drop out of college because he couldn't afford the fees. He and Claire were living together in a cramped, run-down apartment on the other side of town. He'd found a part-time job as a mechanic, his hands now covered in grease instead of holding textbooks. Apparently, they were raising Henry together. In a twisted way, it was a good thing. A child deserved to be raised by his parents, even if those parents were two of the most destructive people I had ever known. I never discussed David with my parents, and they didn't bring him up either. His name became a forbidden word in our house, a ghost that haunted the empty spaces. For everyone asking, I am doing quite well. As I mentioned, I was promoted at my job 2 months ago, so my salary has significantly improved. I haven't been dating anyone, as I feel I still need time and space to heal. The wound was deep, And I knew that trying to fill the void with someone new would be a disservice to them and to myself. I started going to therapy, something I never would have considered before. My therapist, a kind, no-nonsense woman named Dr. Anya Sharma, helped me unpack the complex layers of my childhood trauma and the grief from my marriage. We talked about my mother's favoritism, David's cruelty, and my own patterns of seeking validation from people who were incapable of giving it. It was difficult, painful work, but slowly, I could feel the ice around my heart beginning to thaw. I thought that was the end of the story. I thought I could finally close that chapter of my life. I was wrong. The past wasn't done with me yet. One evening, about 5 months after my last update, I received another call from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something compelled me to answer. "Hello," I said cautiously. "Ethan, it's Claire." Her voice was different. Gone was the pleading, tearful tone from our last conversations. It was flat, cold, and edged with something I couldn't quite place. "What do you want, Claire?" I asked, my body tensing up. "I need to see you," she said. "It's about Henry. Something's wrong." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean, wrong? Is he okay?" Despite everything, a jolt of fear shot through me. "He's sick, Ethan," she said, and then she delivered the blow I never saw coming. "The doctors, they think it's genetic. They need to test family members. They need to test you." The line went silent, but my mind was screaming. "Test me for what? What are you talking about? Claire, David is his father. They should be testing David. They should be testing his family." "They did," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "They tested David. They tested your mother, your father. Nothing matched. The genetic markers they're looking for, they aren't there. Ethan, the doctors think it could be a rare recessive gene. It could come from either side, but they need to rule everything out. David's side of the family isn't providing the answers they need. They asked about you. They know you were registered as his father for the first 5 years of his life." I sank into a chair, my legs suddenly unable to support me. A rare genetic condition. It sounded like something out of a medical drama, not my life. "What's wrong with him?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "He's been getting sick a lot," she explained, her voice cracking for the first time. "Fevers, fatigue, they thought it was just childhood illnesses. But he's not getting better. They did some blood work, and they found some abnormalities. They're worried about his bone marrow. They mentioned something called aplastic anemia, but they're not sure. They need more tests. They need to test you. Ethan, please. He's just a little boy." My first instinct was pure, unadulterated rage. How dare she? How dare she come crawling back to me now, using the child she lied about to pull me back into their vortex of chaos? My second instinct was a cold, sharp denial. This wasn't my problem. I had drawn a line in the sand. I had cut them out. Henry was not my son. But my third instinct, the one that rose from a place deeper than anger or logic, was a sickening wave of fear for the boy. I remembered him as a toddler, his chubby hands grasping my finger. I remembered the weight of him in my arms as he slept, the sound of his giggles as I chased him around the park. 5 years of my life had been dedicated to loving him, to protecting him. You can't just turn that off like a switch. "Why should I help you?" I asked, my voice colder than I intended. "Why should I do anything for you or for David's son?" "Because once, you loved him," she said simply, and the words were a knife in my gut. "And because he might die if you don't. Whatever you think of me, whatever you think of David, Henry is innocent in all of this. He doesn't deserve this." She was right, and I hated her for it. I hated her for being right, for putting me in this impossible position. Helping them meant reopening a wound I had fought so hard to close. It meant seeing her again. It meant potentially seeing David again. It meant stepping back into the past, but not helping. Not helping could mean a child, an innocent child, would suffer. "Fine," I said, the word feeling like a betrayal of myself. "Tell me where and when." The hospital was a sterile, impersonal place that smelled of antiseptic and quiet desperation. I saw Claire in the waiting room, looking smaller and more fragile than I remembered. The stress had taken its toll. There were dark circles under her eyes, and she had lost weight. We didn't hug. We barely made eye contact. The air between us was thick with unspoken history. She gave me the rundown. Henry had been admitted 2 days ago. His condition had worsened. The doctors were running a battery of tests, and they needed a blood sample from me to complete a genetic sequencing panel. A nurse called my name, and I followed her into a small room. The process was quick and painless, just a small prick in my arm. But as I watched the vial fill with my dark red blood, I felt like I was giving away a part of myself that I would never get back. I didn't see Henry. Claire said he was sleeping, and the doctors didn't want him disturbed. I didn't know if I was relieved or disappointed. I told myself it was better this way. After giving my sample, I turned to leave. I had done what she asked. My obligation was fulfilled. "Ethan, wait," Claire called out as I reached the door. I stopped but didn't turn around. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft. "I know you didn't have to do this." I walked out without another word. The drive home was a blur. My mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Anger at Claire for her manipulation, resentment towards David for his very existence, and a deep, aching sadness for the little boy lying in a hospital bed. A week later, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was Dr. Evans, the pediatric hematologist in charge of Henry's case. "Mr. Miller," he said, his tone professional but grave. "I'm calling about Henry's test results. We got your genetic panel back, and we've found something I think you should be aware of." "Okay," I said, my heart starting to pound. "What is it?" "It's about Henry's paternity," he said. "I understand there was a test done previously, during your divorce proceedings." "That's right," I said. It confirmed David Miller is the father." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Well, Mr. Miller," Dr. Evans said, and his next words tilted the world on its axis. "According to our tests, which are far more comprehensive than a standard paternity test, there's a 99.99% probability that you are Henry's biological father. David Miller is not." I couldn't breathe. The phone slipped from my grasp, clattering onto my hardwood floor. I sank to my knees, the doctor's voice still a faint, tinny sound coming from the discarded receiver. It wasn't possible. The test, the divorce, Claire's confession. It was all a lie. But which part? I fumbled for the phone, pressing it back to my ear. "What did you say?" I whispered. "You are his father, Mr. Miller," Dr. Evans repeated, his voice gentle now, as if he understood the magnitude of what he was saying. "And that's not all. Henry has inherited the genetic marker for aplastic anemia from you. It seems you are a carrier of the recessive gene, but you're asymptomatic. Claire is also a carrier. The combination of your genes is what caused Henry's illness." The pieces of the puzzle started to click into place, forming a picture that was more monstrous than I could have ever conceived. The original paternity test. Why had it been wrong? Was it a mistake? A faulty lab? Or was it something else? My mind flashed back to Claire's confession. Her story had been so detailed, so convincing. The affair, the guilt, the decision to stay with me because I was the dependable one. Was it all a fabrication? And if so, why? Why would she lie about something so fundamental? Why would she name my own brother as her lover if it wasn't true? And then I thought of David. His denial at first, then his arrogant admission on the phone. "It's not my fault if women are attracted to me." He had confirmed the story. He had played his part in the lie. The two of them, they had conspired together. They had concocted this entire story. This elaborate, cruel narrative. And for what? I hung up with the doctor, my mind racing. I needed answers. I drove back to the hospital, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. I found Claire in the same waiting room, a lonely figure in a sea of anxiety. "You lied," I said. my voice shaking with a rage that was so profound it was almost silent. "The whole time. You lied about everything." She looked up, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. "Ethan, I can explain." "Explain what?" I demanded, my voice rising. "Explain how you let me believe my son wasn't mine for over a year. Explain why you dragged my brother into this. Why? Claire, why would you do this to me? Why would you do this to Henry?" Tears streamed down her face as the story finally came tumbling out. The truth was simpler and far more pathetic than any fiction I could have imagined. There was no long-term affair with David. There was a one-night stand. Just once. It happened during that first holiday visit. A stupid, drunken mistake that she immediately regretted. When she found out she was pregnant 2 weeks later, she panicked. She didn't know who the father was, and she was terrified. She confessed to David, and together, they came up with a plan. David, seeing an opportunity to hurt me in the deepest way possible, agreed to go along with the story. If the baby turned out to be his, he could rub it in my face. If it turned out to be mine, he could still use the lie to destroy my marriage and my happiness. For him, it was a win-win situation. The paternity test during the divorce had been a cheap, non-legal one done through an online kit. Claire admitted she had swabbed David's cheek herself and sent it in. It was a lie built on a lie. When Henry got sick, and the doctors started asking questions about family medical history, their house of cards began to fall. David's genetics didn't match. The lie was unraveling, and she had no choice but to call me, the one person who could provide the real answers. "So you let me give up my son," I said, the words feeling like stones in my throat. "You let me walk away from my own child, believing he was the product of your affair with my brother, all because you were too cowardly to face the consequences of one stupid mistake." She could only nod, her body racked with sobs. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." But sorry wasn't enough. It would never be enough. They hadn't just broken my heart. They had stolen a year of my son's life from me. And now, my son was sick. He was sick because of me, because of the faulty genes I had passed down to him. And I wasn't even there for him. "Where is he?" I demanded. "I want to see my son." Claire led me through a set of double doors into the pediatric ward. The cheerful cartoon animals painted on the walls felt like a mockery of the sterile anxiety that hung in the air. Henry's room was at the end of the hall. Peering through the small window in the door, I saw him. He was so small in the oversized hospital bed, his skin pale, and for tube tape to his tiny hand. My son, my son. The words echoed in my head, a mantra of disbelief and overwhelming love. The anger I felt towards Claire and David was momentarily eclipsed by a tidal wave of grief for the time I had lost, and a fierce, protective instinct that roared to life inside me. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The quiet beeping of the monitor was the only sound. Henry's eyes fluttered open as I approached his bed. He looked at me, his gaze clouded with fever and confusion. "Daddy," he whispered, his voice weak and raspy. The word shattered what was left of my composure. I knelt by his bedside, taking his free hand in mine. It felt so fragile. "Yeah, buddy," I said, my own voice choked with emotion. "Daddy's here." I stayed with him for hours, long after Claire had retreated to the waiting room, giving us space. I read him stories from a worn copy of Where the Wild Things Are, just like I used to. I told him about my new apartment, about the promotion at my job, about all the silly, mundane things he had missed. He was too weak to say much, but he listened, his eyes never leaving my face. I was home. I had come home to my son. The next few weeks were a blur of hospital visits, consultations with doctors, and sleepless nights. Dr. Evans explained Henry's condition to me in detail. Aplastic anemia meant his bone marrow wasn't producing enough new blood cells. His immune system was compromised, leaving him vulnerable to infections. The treatment options were limited and daunting: blood transfusions to manage the symptoms, immunosuppressive therapy, And the most promising, but also the most difficult option, a bone marrow transplant. For a transplant to be successful, they needed a donor with a matching tissue type. Siblings are often the best match, but Henry was an only child. The next best hope was a parent. Claire was tested immediately, but she was only a partial match. Then, it was my turn. As his biological father, there was a chance I could be the perfect donor. The wait for the results was agonizing. During that time, I became a permanent fixture at the hospital. I set up a makeshift office in the corner of Henry's room, working remotely so I could be by his side. Claire and I existed in a state of strained truce. Our shared terror for our son's health forged a fragile, temporary alliance. We didn't talk about the past. We didn't talk about David. Our entire world had shrunk to the four walls of that hospital room. Our conversations limited to medical updates and Henry's daily needs. One evening, as I was sitting by Henry's bed while he slept, David showed up. I hadn't seen him since the day I'd exposed him to our parents. He looked gaunt and tired, a shadow of the arrogant golden boy he used to be. He stood awkwardly in the doorway, his eyes darting between me and the small figure in the bed. I heard he was sick, he said, his voice barely audible. "Get out," I said without looking at him. My voice was quiet, but laced with venom. "Ethan, I wanted to see him," he stammered. Claire told me what happened, about the tests, about everything. I finally turned to face him, a cold, hard rage solidifying in my chest. "You have no right to be here," I said. "You have no right to even say his name. You helped her steal him from me. You let me believe he wasn't my son. You stood by and watched me walk away from my own child. Why? For what? Just to hurt me?" He had the decency to look ashamed. I don't know," he mumbled, staring at the floor. "It started as a stupid lie, and it spun out of control. I was angry at you, at Dad. I wanted to see you fail. I was a coward. You're less than a coward." I spat. "You're a parasite. You feed on other people's misery because you're too pathetic to create any happiness of your own." He flinched as if I'd slapped him. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "Ethan, I am so sorry. Your sorrow is worthless to me," I said, turning my back on him. "Now get out of this room before I have security remove you." He lingered for a moment longer, then turned and walked away. I heard a choked sob just before the door clicked shut. I felt nothing. His pain meant absolutely nothing to me. The next day, Dr. Evans called me into his office. "We have the results of your compatibility test," he said, his expression cautiously optimistic. "Ethan, you're a perfect match." Relief washed over me so intensely that my knees went weak. I was a perfect match. I could save my son. The transplant procedure was scheduled for the following week. It was a complex and risky process. First, they would use chemotherapy to completely wipe out Henry's existing, faulty bone marrow, leaving his immune system defenseless. Then, they would harvest stem cells from my bone marrow and transplant them into him. The hope was that my healthy cells would migrate to his bones and begin producing new, healthy blood cells. The night before the procedure, I sat with Henry, holding his hand. He was scared. I was scared. "Is it going to hurt, Daddy?" he asked, his voice small. "They'll give you medicine so you won't feel a thing," I promised, stroking his hair. "And when you wake up, you're going to start getting better. I'm going to give you some of my super strong cells, and they're going to fight off all the bad stuff. You're going to be okay." I was saying the words as much for myself as for him. My part of the procedure was relatively simple, though painful. They put me under general anesthesia and used large needles to extract marrow from my hip bones. When I woke up, I was sore and groggy, but my only thought was of Henry. The waiting period after the transplant was the hardest part of my life. For 2 weeks, Henry was in isolation, his body fighting to accept the new cells. We watched his blood counts with bated breath, praying for any sign of improvement. It was a slow, grueling process. There were good days and bad days, days filled with hope, and days filled with a terrifying fear. During this time, my parents were a constant source of support. My dad visited every day, bringing me food and sitting with me for hours in silent companionship. My mother, racked with guilt over her role in the family's destruction, threw herself into helping in any way she could. She organized a meal train, cleaned my apartment, and prayed endlessly. Her transformation was remarkable. The crisis had stripped away her lifelong biases, leaving only a mother's desperate love for her grandson. One afternoon, about 3 weeks after the transplant, Dr. Evans came into the room, a wide smile on his face. He was holding a chart. "We have some good news," he announced. "Henry's white blood cell count is up. The new marrow is starting to graft. The transplant is working." I broke down and cried. Right there in the middle of the hospital room, I hugged my dad. I hugged my mom. And in a moment of shared, overwhelming relief, I even hugged Claire. We had made it. My son was going to live. The road to recovery was long. Henry had to remain in the hospital for another month, his immune system slowly rebuilding. But with each passing day, he grew stronger. The color returned to his cheeks. His laughter, a sound I had desperately missed, began to fill the quiet hospital room once more. The day he was finally discharged was one of the happiest of my life. I carried him out of the hospital, the sun warm on our faces. He was still weak, but he was alive, and he was mine. In the aftermath, life found a new normal. I was granted full custody of Henry. Claire, acknowledging her profound mistakes and instability, agreed it was for the best. She had visitation rights, but Henry lived with me. Our relationship remained functional for Henry's sake, but the trust and love were gone forever. My parents, having witnessed the near loss of their grandson, made a decision. My father called me one evening and asked me to come over. When I arrived, he and my mother were sitting at the dining room table with a stack of legal documents. "We've been thinking a lot about the future," my dad said, his voice serious, "about family and about what really matters." He pushed a document towards me. It was their revised will. He had already disinherited David, but this was different. He and my mom were transferring the majority of their assets, including the house and their investment portfolio, into a trust for Henry, with me as the trustee. "We're not waiting until we're gone," my mom said, her eyes glistening. "We want to see him benefit from this now. We want him to have every opportunity, every advantage in life. We owe him that much." It was their way of atoning, of trying to repair the damage they had a hand in creating. The inheritance, the $2 million that had once been a symbol of my brother's downfall, had now become a symbol of my son's future. It was a profound and unexpected turn of events. I didn't hear from David for a long time after that. The family had completely ostracized him. Then, about 6 months after Henry came home from the hospital, I received a letter. It was from him. The envelope was thin, the address written in his familiar, messy scrawl. I almost threw it away, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened it. It was a single page. "Ethan," it began, "I know you don't want to hear from me. I know my words don't mean much to you, but I have to try. What I did to you, to Claire, and to Henry is unforgivable. I live with that every single day. I'm in therapy now. I'm trying to understand why I became the person I was. I'm working at a garage, and I'm paying Claire child support for a son that was never mine, because I know I owe her that much for the lie I helped create. I heard Henry is doing well. I'm glad. I don't expect your forgiveness. I don't deserve it, but I wanted you to know that I am truly, deeply sorry. I hope that one day, you and Henry can have the life I tried to take from you." I read the letter twice, then folded it and put it away. It didn't change anything. The years of cruelty, the devastating legacy couldn't be erased by a single page of apologies. But it was, perhaps, a sign that the golden boy had finally been broken, and in his place, a man was slowly, painfully, beginning to emerge. My forgiveness was not his to have, but perhaps his own self-reflection was a start. My focus was no longer on him. It was on the little boy sleeping soundly in the next room. My son. My future. Life with Henry was a process of rediscovery. It was like learning a familiar song in a new key. We fell back into our old routines, but everything felt different, more precious. I cherished the simple moments, making pancakes on Saturday mornings, helping him with his first grade homework, tucking him into bed at night. The year I had lost with him had taught me not to take a single second for granted. The anger I held for so long began to soften, not into forgiveness for Claire and David, but into a quiet gratitude for what I had now. My son was healthy, and he was with me. That was all that mattered. My relationship with my parents was fully healed. The crisis had been a crucible, burning away the old resentments and forging a new, stronger bond based on mutual respect and a shared love for Henry. Dad and I still golfed every weekend, but now our conversations were lighter, filled with anecdotes about Henry's latest antics at school. My mother became the doting grandmother she was always meant to be. She showered Henry with affection, trying to pour a lifetime of love into every hug and every home-cooked meal. I saw the regret in her eyes sometimes, a shadow of the mother she had been to me. But I chose to focus on the grandmother she was becoming for my son. For his sake, I let the past go. One afternoon, about a year after Henry's recovery, my dad called me. "Ethan," he said, his voice unusually somber. "There's something you should know. It's David." My body tensed. I hadn't heard his name in months. "What about him?" "There was an accident," my dad said, his voice heavy. "At the garage where he works, a car slipped off a lift. He was underneath it." The world went quiet for a moment. I felt a strange, hollow sensation in my chest. It wasn't grief. Not yet. It was shock. "Is he?" I couldn't bring myself to finish the sentence. "He's alive," my dad said quickly. "But it's bad, Ethan. Really bad. He's at University Hospital. The doctors, they're not sure if he'll walk again." I drove to the hospital, a place I had hoped never to see again. My parents were already there, their faces pale and drawn. My mother was crying softly into a tissue. My father just stood there, staring at the closed door of the intensive care unit, his expression unreadable. A doctor came out and spoke to us in hushed, clinical tones. David had suffered severe crush injuries to his lower body. His pelvis was shattered, and there was significant spinal damage. He had survived the surgery, but his prognosis was uncertain. The road ahead would be long and arduous, filled with more surgeries, physical therapy, and the very real possibility of permanent disability. I looked through the small window in the ICU door. David was lying in the bed, pale and still, a web of tubes and wires connecting him to a symphony of beeping machines. He looked nothing like the brother I knew. The arrogance, the smug confidence, it was all gone, stripped away by tragedy, leaving only a broken, vulnerable man. In that moment, looking at his shattered form, I didn't feel hatred. I didn't feel vindication. I didn't feel anything at all. It was just a profound, empty sadness for the waste of it all. The wasted years, the wasted potential, the brotherly bond we never had. Over the next few months, David fought his way back from the brink. He was eventually moved out of the ICU to a rehabilitation facility. The doctors were right. He would never walk the same way again. He would be dependent on a wheelchair, perhaps crutches on good days, for the rest of his life. The accident had a profound effect on my parents. My father, seeing his son so utterly broken, couldn't maintain his hard-line stance any longer. He and my mother began visiting David at the rehabilitation center. They helped pay for his medical bills, which were astronomical. It wasn't a full reconciliation. The betrayal was too deep to ever be fully erased. But he was still their son, and they couldn't abandon him in his darkest hour. I didn't visit him. I couldn't. My healing was still too fragile, and I knew that re-engaging with him would only reopen old wounds. My priority was Henry. One day, my mother asked me, her voice hesitant, "David has been asking about you. He wants to see you." I shook my head. I can't. Mom. He's changed. Ethan. She insisted. This accident. It's changed him. He's not the same person. I'm glad to hear that, I said honestly. But it doesn't change the past. A few weeks later, another letter arrived. This time, the handwriting was shaky and labored. Ethan, I'm writing this myself. It's taking a long time. My hands don't work as well as they used to. Mom told me she asked you to visit. I understand why you said no. I probably wouldn't visit me either. Lying here, day after day. You have a lot of time to think. I've thought about everything. About us as kids. About how cruel I was. I used to think I was better than you. That I deserved everything just because I was me. I see now that I had it all backward. You were always the stronger one. You were strong enough to be kind. To be decent. Even when I gave you every reason not to be. I destroyed our family because I was a weak, jealous little boy. And now, I have nothing. I know I deserve this. In a way, this wheelchair is a kind of justice. It's an outward sign of how broken I've always been on the inside. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect you to ever see me as a brother again. But I want to say one last thing. I am proud of you. I'm proud of the father you are to Henry. He's a lucky kid. Don't ever let the ghosts of our family haunt him. He deserves better. We all deserved better. David. I held the letter for a long time. It felt different from the first one. The self-pity was gone, replaced by a raw, unflinching self-awareness. It was the confession I had waited a lifetime to hear. My life is quiet now, and I am grateful for the quiet. Henry is 8 years old, healthy and thriving. He's smart and funny and has a kind heart. He is the best part of me. Our apartment is filled with his laughter, with Lego creations and crayon drawings taped to the fridge. It's a home, a real home. I am dating someone new. Her name is Sarah, and she's a teacher at Henry's school. She knows my story, all of it. She listens without judgment and holds my hand when the memories get too heavy. With her, I feel a sense of peace I never thought possible. My parents are devoted grandparents. The $2 million inheritance sits in a trust, waiting for Henry's future. It's no longer a weapon or a prize. It's a promise of a better life, free from the shadows that haunted my own childhood. As for David, he lives in an assisted living facility. My parents visit him weekly. I hear he's taking online classes, trying to build some semblance of a new life from the wreckage of his old one. I have never gone to see him, but last week, I did something I hadn't done before. I took out his letter, the second one, and I wrote a single sentence on a piece of paper. I hope you find peace. I put it in an envelope and mailed it to his facility. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a reconciliation. It was an acknowledgement that his journey was his own, and mine was mine. It was a final act of letting go, of cutting the last, frayed thread that connected our broken pasts. My story is no longer about my brother and the hell he created. It's about my son, and the life we are building together. A life of healing, of hope, and of quiet, hard-won peace.